What if I told you that in the world of commercial real estate, a fully occupied six-bedroom house actually only has 4.5 beds?
I mean, it sounds like a riddle. Or just, really bad math.
Right. It makes zero sense on the surface, but it's actually this massive hidden financial metric.
Yeah, it really is. And it creates this huge disconnect between the people funding a business and the people who are actually running it day to day.
Exactly. So today we are going to show you how savvy investors take a bank's incredibly pessimistic math and basically use it to build massive profit margins.
It's honestly one of the most misunderstood dynamics in real estate financing right now. You essentially have these two completely different versions of reality just running parallel to each other.
Yeah.
There's the underwriter spreadsheet reality, and then there's the boots on the ground operational reality.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are doing something really fascinating today, and I'm super excited about it. Instead of just looking at, broad market trends like we usually do, we are analyzing the proprietary internal models from our sponsor.
Which is really a rare look behind the curtain.
It totally is. So a huge shout out to our sponsor, Flowers and Associates, Property Rentals, creating passive income through special needs housing. We have their detailed breakdowns on how lenders evaluate highly specialized real estate, specifically residential assisted living or RALs.
And we're looking at how that underwriting differs from what is actually happening in high-demand markets, places like Phoenix, Arizona.
Yeah, and the contrast is just jarring. Okay, let's unpack this. If you look at how a traditional lender underwrites an RAL facility, their baseline assumption is inherently conservative, right?
Oh, incredibly conservative. They typically apply a 10 to 20% vacancy rate to their projections right out of the gate.
Wait, right out of the gate.
Yeah. So they are underwriting your business as if it will only ever be 80 to 90% occupied, at best.
And if you're a new operator, or, this is a brand new startup home without a track record, it gets even harsher.
Much harsher. The bank bumps that assumed vacancy rate up to like 15 to 25%.
Let me put that into a real-world perspective for you listening, because it's kind of wild. Let's say you just bought this beautifully renovated 6-bed residential assisted living home. It physically has 6 beds in it.
Right.
But when you sit down with the lender, they run all their math as if you only have 4.5, maybe 5 occupied beds. They literally erase an entire bed's worth of potential revenue before you even open the doors.
They really do. But then, you take that spreadsheet to a market like Phoenix, and Phoenix is arguably one of the strongest senior housing markets in the country, right?
Sure. You have that massive demographic shift, the silver tsunami, right?
Exactly. The silver tsunami, combined with a climate that just attracts retirees from all over the country. So the demand for intimate residential-style assisted living is staggering.
So the real-world data completely contradicts the bank spreadsheet. Because for stabilized facilities in that market, actual occupancy typically runs at, 85 to 95%?
Easily. And for those smaller 6 to 10 bed homes we were just talking about, the source material notes, they frequently run at an incredible 90 to 100% once they're fully established.
That's insane.
Yeah, if you have a solid operation, you are basically full year-round. You have a waiting list.
So I have to ask, why the disconnect? I mean, it's like a teacher grading you on a curve where the highest possible score they'll ever expect from you is a B-, even if you're a straight-A student. Why wouldn't a commercial lender want to believe the actual real-world data from such a hot market?
Well, what's fascinating here is that we have to fundamentally shift how we view the asset itself. Because when a lender evaluates a standard residential mortgage, say a duplex you're renting out, they're looking at bricks, mortar, and your personal income.
Right. It's a static asset.
Exactly. It's static. But when lenders evaluate a residential assisted living facility, they aren't just looking at a house. They're underwriting a living, breathing healthcare business that just happens to take place inside a house.
That is a massive distinction. A healthcare business carries a vastly different risk profile than a vacant property waiting for a tenant.
Precisely. In a standard rental, if a tenant moves out, you clean the carpets and find a new one, no big deal.
Right.
But in an RAL, vacancy rates directly impact the gross revenue required to pay for highly specialized 247 caregiving staff and insurance, food, medical supplies.
So that net revenue dictates whether or not the business can actually pay back the multi-million-dollar loan.
Yes. So the bank is forced to evaluate the overall stability of an active enterprise. They know that even in a booming market like Phoenix, life happens.
Which brings us to the bank's favorite activity planning for an absolute catastrophe.
Right, the worst case scenario.
The underwriter builds in what they call a vacancy buffer.
Yeah.
And looking at the notes here, they are accounting for very specific operational friction points. They price in licensing delays because, let's be real, state health departments and fire marshals never move as fast as you want them to.
Never.
They price in slower lease-up periods. They heavily factor in staff turnover, which is just a massive, expensive reality in healthcare.
Oh, absolutely. And they also account for temporary census drops, which is the industry term for when residents need to move to a higher acuity hospital or, simply pass away.
So the overarching philosophy of commercial lending is basically this. It is far better to assume lower occupancy and be pleasantly surprised than to overestimate income and suddenly end up with a borrower who defaults.
Yeah, the bank absolutely does not want the keys to your assisted living facility. They don't want to run a healthcare business. They just want their monthly yield.
Let me push back on this a little, though.
Sure.
Because if I'm listening to this and I want to start one of these homes, I'm looking at this as a massive penalty. So what does this all mean for the person actually trying to buy the property? If the bank is deliberately underestimating my revenue by up to 25%, doesn't that make it incredibly difficult to qualify for the loan in the first place?
It does restrict your purchasing power, without a doubt. But this is the crucial difference between risk versus performance.
Okay, tell me more about that.
The bank does not care about your best case scenario. They really don't. They don't care about your marketing plan or your vision for a waiting list around the block. They are legally and financially obligated to underwrite your worst case survivable scenario.
Wow. Worst case survivable scenario. That is a powerful way to frame it. It's almost like an engineer stress testing a bridge,
Exactly like that.
The engineer might know the bridge can easily hold 100 cars at once, but they're only going to officially rate it for, say, 60 cars, just in case there's a hurricane and an earthquake on the exact same day.
That is the perfect analogy. That 15% gap between what you know you can achieve and what the bank assumes you will achieve, that is the structural integrity of your loan.
Right.
If a resident moves out unexpectedly, or if you have a sudden staffing crisis that prevents you from legally taking on a new resident for 6 weeks, that conservative buffer ensures you don't instantly go bankrupt. The business survives the stress test.
Which logically transitions us into how an investor actually structures their deal to pass that test. Because understanding these assumptions isn't just like an academic exercise. It dictates the actual math of your OSHA.
Yes, absolutely.
If your financial model requires 100% occupancy just to pay the mortgage and keep the lights on, the lender will throw your application straight in the trash.
Full stop. The golden rule of commercial underwriting in this space is that your deal must cash flow at lower occupancy. Strong deals typically have to demonstrate profitability at 80 to 85% occupancy.
Okay.
And lenders measure this using a very specific metric called the debt service coverage ratio, or DSCR.
Right, the DSCR. Let's break down the mechanics of that for you listening, just so it's super clear.
Yeah, so lenders generally require a DSCR of 1.20 to 1.30 or higher.
So a DSCR of 1.0 basically means your business's net operating income is exactly equal to your loan payment. You make $10,000 and the mortgage is $10,000. You're just breaking even.
Right, you're just treading water.
So a 1.20 means you are generating 20% more net income than you need to cover the debt.
Yes, and here is the kicker. The bank demands that you show that 1.20 ratio based on their pessimistic 80% occupancy assumption.
Man. So they are forcing you to prove that on a bad day, operating at a fraction of your capacity, you can still cover the debt plus an extra 20% just for safety.
Exactly.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because this is the aha moment in the source material where the frustration of conservative underwriting completely flips into this massive forced wealth-building mechanism.
It's the best part.
Once you, as the operator, exceed the bank's conservative 80% assumption, which we already established is highly probable in a market like Phoenix, every single occupied bed above that line becomes pure profit margin.
Because your fixed costs are already handled?
Yes. Your mortgage, your property taxes, your core administrative staff, your basic utilities, those heavy expenses are entirely paid for by the first 80% of your residents.
Right.
So when you fill that fifth and sixth bed in a 6-bed home, The revenue from those specific beds doesn't get eaten up by overhead. It drops almost entirely to your bottom line. The bank's pessimism actually locks in your outsized wealth.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it forces you to be a resilient business owner from day one.
Yeah.
By making you structure a deal that survives comfortably at 80%, the bank inadvertently guarantees that when you hit your operational stride at 95%, you have an incredibly healthy, highly profitable machine.
You're never operating on razor-thin margins.
Exactly. You have massive breathing room.
Okay, so if the bank is forcing your hand and the upside is that lucrative, the obvious question is, how are the top operators actually bulletproofing their occupancy to hit that 95 to 100% mark?
Right, because you can't just put up a billboard on the highway and hope families drive by and drop off their grandparents. You have to manufacture certainty.
Manufacture certainty. I like that. So how do they do it?
Well, the materials outline specific proactive mechanisms to bridge that gap between the bank's baseline and peak performance. And the first mechanism is deeply integrating into local referral networks.
Okay.
Consistent, high-level occupancy does not come from consumer marketing. It comes from business-to-business relationships with hospitals, medical case managers, home health agencies, and senior placement services.
Let's dive into why that actually works. Because it's not just about, shaking hands with doctors and leaving some brochures.
No, not at all.
There is a massive mechanical driver here. Hospitals are heavily penalized by Medicare for 30-day readmissions.
Huge penalties.
So if they discharge a frail senior back to an empty house, and that senior falls and ends up back in the emergency room 2 weeks later, the hospital takes a massive financial hit.
That is the exact leverage point. The hospital's discharge planners and social workers are absolutely desperate for safe, reliable, high-quality residential care homes.
They need you just as much as you need them.
Oh, maybe more. If you operate a stellar facility, you aren't selling to that case manager. You are solving their multi-million-dollar liability problem. Once you become their trusted solution, they will effectively keep your beds full for you.
You just become the release valve for the local healthcare system.
Exactly.
Okay, so what's the next mechanism for bulletproofing the revenue?
Diversifying payer sources. This is all about eliminating income volatility. In the RAL space, private pay residents, meaning families who are just paying out of pocket, they are highly sought after because the margins are great.
Right, you can charge a premium.
But if your entire facility is private pay, your business is incredibly fragile.
Because if the stock market takes a dive or a resident simply outlives their retirement savings, that revenue vanishes overnight.
Yes, and suddenly you have an empty bed.
It makes me think of building a financial seawall. Right, it's like a three-legged stool. Private pay is your high tide. It brings in the most volume and the best margins, but it recedes when the macroeconomic environment dips.
I like that visual. A three-legged stool is a great way to think about it. So to build the bedrock of that seawall, operators mix in long-term care insurance payouts and state waiver or program-based residents.
Okay, how does the waiver program work?
With the state waiver program, the reimbursement rate per bed might be slightly lower than what a wealthy family would pay out of pocket, but that income is guaranteed by the government. It does not disappear in a recession.
Ah, so you're trading a little bit of margin for a lot of stability.
Exactly. By blending those different revenue streams, your business remains standing even if the private pay sector softens. You are structurally insulating your cash flow.
Which brings us to the final operational strategy, and I'm going to be honest, I want to push back on this one.
Yeah, let's hear it.
The source material emphasizes maintaining 3 to 6 months of operating reserves.
Yeah.
You are telling a new investor who just scraped together a massive commercial down payment and funded their initial renovations that they also need half a year of operating cash, just sitting dead in a checking account.
Oh, it's tough.
That sounds incredibly prohibitive for anyone trying to get into this space. I mean, who has that kind of cash just sitting around?
It is a high barrier to entry, I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But it is entirely non-negotiable if you want to survive. Even with the best hospital referral networks and the most insulated payer mix, friction happens.
Give me an example.
A resident passes away. It takes 3 weeks to renovate and repaint the room, and then another 2 weeks to process all the intake paperwork for the new resident. That is 5 weeks of zero revenue for that specific bed.
And the bank already warned us about that. That's the exact census drop they underwrote for.
Exactly. The operators who fail are the ones who don't have the cash to float that 5-week gap. They panic.
What do they do when they panic?
They might drop their care standards to save money, or they might accept a resident who is a terrible fit for the home just to get some cash flowing.
Which just ruins the culture of the facility.
It ruins the culture, it causes your good staff to quit, and it spirals. But if you have 6 months of operating reserves sitting in the bank, you don't panic. You calmly renovate the room, wait for the right resident, and make sound, long-term operational decisions. That dead cash is actually buying your peace of mind and protecting the asset.
It prevents reactionary decision-making. That makes total sense when you put it that way.
Yeah.
And it's really fascinating to see how Robert Flowers, the industry expert behind today's source material, actually operationalizes all of this math. Looking at the framework provided by our sponsor, Flowers and Associates, they have taken this exact understanding of risk, forced margins, and stable housing and applied it to a completely different asset class.
They really have. They pivot from traditional residential assisted living into special needs housing.
Which is such an interesting shift.
It is a brilliant adaptation. This raises an important question, right? How can you apply these exact models to your own financial journey? The mechanics of special needs housing utilize the exact same principles of capturing high-demand demographics and utilizing diversified, government-backed payer sources. But they structure the business model differently to remove some of the heaviest operational friction.
Specifically, they partner directly with established nonprofits to provide housing for adults with disabilities. And the division of labor here is the real secret sauce.
Oh, it's a game changer.
Because if you're running a traditional RAL, you're the landlord, the healthcare administrator, the HR department for the nurses, and the chief compliance officer. It is a really heavy, highly regulated lift.
Very heavy. But in the model Robert Flowers advocates for, you split those responsibilities.
Okay, so how does it work?
The investor simply purchases and maintains the physical real estate. You act purely as the landlord. You master lease the property to a specialized nonprofit organization.
That makes it so much simpler.
It does. That nonprofit is the entity that actually holds the government grants, brings in the wait list of residents, and provides all the 247 care staffing and case management.
You bypass the massive medical licensing headaches entirely.
Completely bypass.
When nonprofit handles the complex healthcare side and you just collect a stable, predictable lease payment backed by institutional funding. It takes the worst-case survivable scenario we talked about earlier and makes it incredibly resilient.
It really does.
And what's great is Robert Flowers, who's an award-winning real estate investor with over 15 years of experience, by the way. His firm is A+ BBB, accredited and featured in Who's Who. He published a comprehensive blueprint on how to execute this exact pivot.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yes, so for you listening, if you want to dig into this, grab his book. It is called The Joy of Helping Others, Creating Passive Income Streams through Special Needs Housing, available on passiveimpactbookstore.com or Amazon.
For anyone listening who understands the power of that profit margin we discussed, but maybe, doesn't want to personally manage a team of caregivers, that book is the required text.
Absolutely.
It breaks down how to identify the right properties, how to approach these nonprofits, and how to structure the leases so that both the landlord and the community benefit immensely.
And the source notes show that his firm actually takes this a step further. They don't just write about it, they actively help investors build this out. So if you are serious about creating that kind of stable, predictable income, and you want to use the exact model that bypasses traditional real estate headaches to build cash flow, while making a tangible impact, they set up direct consultations.
That's incredibly helpful.
Yeah, you can actually call them directly at 901-621-3544. Again, that number is 901-621-3544. Whether you're looking to transition an underperforming rental portfolio or just start fresh with a model that prioritizes passive income, that is the exact next step to take.
To pull all of these threads together, our journey today really started with what looked like a penalty, that 15 to 25% gap between what a commercial lender will underwrite on their spreadsheet and what a property can actually achieve in a surging demographic market.
It totally feels like the system is rigged against the operator at first glance. You look at the math and think the bank is just being unnecessarily difficult.
But as we unpacked the mechanics of the DSCR, we saw that conservative underwriting is actually a forced mechanism for survival.
Yeah?
It demands that the deal works at lower occupancy. It ensures the debt is covered even during the inevitable operational hiccups like licensing delays or temporary vacancies. And most importantly, it establishes the concrete foundation for your profit margin.
Because once you cross that 80% threshold, the fixed costs are paid and the rest is your upside. You capture that upside not by hoping for the best, but by executing on the operational realities. You build the financial seawall with diverse payer sources, you solve the hospital's readmission liabilities to lock in your referrals, and you keep solid cash reserves so you never have to make a desperate decision.
Whether you are investing in traditional residential assisted living, stepping into special needs housing through the nonprofit partnership models Robert Flowers teaches, or frankly, exploring entirely different commercial business ventures, understanding the difference between bank risk and operational performance is a massive competitive advantage.
It really is.
You have to learn how to speak the language of the underwriter spreadsheet while building a business that operates in the real world.
We started today talking about that riddle, how a six-bed house can only have 4.5 beds on paper. That gap isn't bad math. It is a meticulously designed stress test. It is the institution grading you on a curve to make sure you can survive the storm.
So I want to leave you with a final thought today. We know that lenders mandate a worst-case survivable scenario before they will invest a single dime into a commercial property. If you were to underwrite your own personal finances, your career choices, or your major life decisions with that exact same ruthless requirement, how differently would you structure your life today?